Dr. Lena Petrova felt the silence of the university hallway press in on her, a dead weight that seemed heavier than the humid summer air. 1 week ago, this same corridor had echoed with celebration. The champagne-fueled buzz of Dr. Aris Thorne's monumental discovery. Now the quiet felt predatory, as if it were patiently waiting to consume the last vestiges of that triumph. She paused before the familiar oak door, the simple brass plate reading Dr. Aris Thorne, Department Head Eurasian Archaeology, now seeming like a tombstone. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the knob. The cold metal, a stark contrast to the warmth of her own rising anxiety. Inside, the room was a sterile void, stripped of the chaotic personality that had been its hallmark for over 2 decades. Thorne's office, once a legendary labyrinth of towering book stacks, scattered maps, and half-finished cups of tea, was now unnervingly tidy. The scent of industrial cleaner and lemon polish had replaced the familiar aroma of old paper and pipe tobacco. It was a professional sanitization, an erasure of a life's work that screamed louder than any shout. The university administration had called it a standard procedure for a faculty member on extended leave, but Lena knew that was a lie. 2 uniformed campus security officers stood stiffly by the window, their presence a clumsy attempt at official oversight. They offered her a rehearsed, hollow sympathy, reciting the official narrative of a brilliant man succumbing to the pressures of his work. They spoke of the treacherous Altai Mountains, of a sudden disoriented flight from his research camp. Lena's gaze drifted past them, her mind refusing to accept the simplistic explanation for the disappearance of a man she knew to be as meticulous and steady as a seasoned mountaineer. Her eyes scanned the room, cataloguing the absences like fresh wounds. The framed photograph of Thorne with his daughter was gone from the wall, leaving a faint, ghostly rectangle on the faded paint. The worn leather armchair where he had held countless impromptu tutorials was missing, as were the teetering piles of research journals that had always threatened to collapse in a paper avalanche. Even the scuffed-up Persian rug, a gift from a grateful sheikh, had been rolled up and removed. It was a targeted deletion, a systematic removal of every personal touch that had made this space Thorne's sanctuary. The only object left behind was a magnificent gold plaque, placed with deliberate precision in the exact center of his otherwise barren desk. It was an artifact from the newly unearthed Scythian tomb, a masterpiece of animal-style art that depicted a swirling vortex of griffins and stags. Its polished surface gleamed under the sterile fluorescent lights, a beacon of antiquity in a scrubbed, clean modern space. Lena felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, a primal sense of wrongness that transcended logic. She approached the desk slowly, her footsteps echoing in the unnerving quiet. The plaque was heavy, solid, its intrinsic value dwarfed by its historical significance. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Aris Thorne would never have left such a priceless artifact out in the open, handled without gloves and subjected to the unfiltered air of his office. He was a man who treated every shard of pottery with a reverence bordering on religious devotion. This was not carelessness, it was a signal fire. The university chancellor has authorized its temporary storage here, under our supervision, one of the officers stated, his voice flat and devoid of curiosity. It is scheduled to be transferred to the secure vault at the museum tomorrow morning. Lena barely heard him, her mind racing, her senses attuned to the wrongness of the scene. The placement was too perfect, too theatrical, for a man who lived his life amidst the beautiful chaos of discovery. She leaned closer, her reflection a distorted mask on the plaque's golden surface. The intricate engravings seemed to writhe, the ancient beasts locked in an eternal, silent struggle. She could almost feel Thorne's presence in the room, a ghost whispering a warning she couldn't yet comprehend. This wasn't an oversight or a bizarre oversight in the midst of a mental breakdown. It was a message, a carefully chosen word in a language only she was meant to understand. Lena straightened up, her expression hardening into a mask of professional composure she did not feel. She thanked the officers for their time, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She knew what she had to do, the path Thorne had laid out for her with this single audacious clue. The official story was a flimsy curtain drawn over a much darker stage, and Thorne had just handed her the ticket to the real performance. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell upon the empty bookshelf behind the desk. A single volume remained, a collection of Rilke's poetry that Thorn had often quoted, its spine unbroken, its pages seemingly unread. It was another anomaly, another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Thorn had given her a copy of this very book when she first became his student, telling her that the deepest truths are often hidden in the most beautiful cages. The plaque was the cage, she now realized, and somewhere within its golden intricacy lay the key. Her investigation had just begun, not in the remote mountains of a foreign land, but here, in this cold, empty room, with the ghost of her mentor and the silent scream of a single, priceless artifact. The first step was to get the plaque out of this office, away from the prying eyes of the university and its sanitized version of the truth. She needed to see what Thorn wanted her to see, and she knew she would have to act quickly, before the official story solidified into an unbreakable wall of lies. She would not let him be erased. She would not let his final message go unheard. Lena's apartment, usually a haven of academic clutter and the comforting scent of brewing tea, had transformed into a high-tech command center. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting laptops and hard drives in a chaotic web, the hum of their cooling fans a constant, low thrum against the silence of her thoughts. The official investigation had hit a dead end with predictable speed, the local authorities in the Altai region closing the case with a finding of death by misadventure, a convenient fiction that absolved everyone of responsibility. But Lena knew Thorn's digital life held more clues than any mountain trail, and she was determined to resurrect his ghost from the machine. Her first attempts were met with a series of digital brick walls. Thorn's university servers had been professionally wiped, his campus computer's hard drive reformatted to factory settings. His cloud storage accounts, once overflowing with decades of research, now showed 0 bytes of data, their emptiness a digital parallel to his sanitized office. It was a thorough professional cleansing, the work of someone who understood not just how to delete files, but how to obliterate their very memory from the digital ether. Yet Thorn had been a man of redundancies, a digital prepper who preached the gospel of multiple backups. He had often joked about his paranoid protocols, a system of hidden layered data storage that Lana had always found endearingly excessive. Now, she prayed his paranoia had been justified. Following a faint trail of breadcrumbs he had once laid out for her during a late-night discussion on data security, she began to probe the deeper, murkier corners of the internet, searching for the digital ark he might have built. After 2 sleepless nights, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of desperation, she found it, tucked away on a secure, encrypted server based in Iceland, masked behind 3 layers of anonymizing proxies, was a hidden cloud backup. Most of the data was hopelessly corrupted, a jumble of alphanumeric gibberish that even the most advanced recovery software couldn't unscramble. But one file, a tiny audio fragment just a few seconds long, had survived the purge. Lena cleaned up the recording, filtering out the static and background noise until a voice emerged from the digital snow. It was Thorn, his voice tight with a fear she had never heard from him before, a raw, ragged whisper that made the hair on her arms stand on end. "It's not Scythian," he rasped, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. "Altai Corp knows. They know it upends the entire historical narrative. They won't let it." The audio cut out abruptly, leaving Lena in a silence more terrifying than the words themselves. The fragment was a confirmation of her deepest fears. Thorn hadn't stumbled off a cliff in a fit of disorientation. He had been silenced. The name Altai Corp, the powerful mining conglomerate that had sponsored his expedition, now hung in the air like a toxic cloud. They were not patrons of science, she realized, but gatekeepers of a truth they were desperate to suppress. The plaque on her desk, which she had managed to requisition from the university under the pretext of conducting a detailed metallurgical analysis, suddenly felt heavier, its cold surface a conduit to a dangerous secret. This was the first major twist, the moment the ground shifted beneath her feet. Driven by Thorn's whispered warning, Lena turned her attention from his digital ghost to the golden artifact itself. She photographed the plaque from every conceivable angle, using a high-resolution macro lens that captured every minute detail of its surface. The intricate animal-style engravings, once a beautiful testament to ancient craftsmanship, now looked like a complex lock waiting for the right key. She fed the high-definition images into a spectrographic analysis program, a piece of software typically used to detect forgeries by analyzing the elemental composition of pigments and metals. She wasn't looking for forgery, however. She was looking for something that didn't belong. For hours, the program ran, cross-referencing the metallic composition and surface topography, flagging microscopic inconsistencies. Then it happened. The software chimed, a single sharp note that cut through the low hum of her computers. Hidden within the deep grooves of the ancient Scythian engravings, almost invisible to the naked eye, were a series of microscopic laser-etched characters. They were not part of the original design. They were modern, precise, and utterly out of place. It was a cipher, a string of letters and numbers etched onto the gold with a technology that was centuries removed from the Scythian artisans who had crafted the plaque. The ancient artifact was not just a message. It was a key, a Trojan horse, carrying a modern secret within its ancient belly. Lena stared at the screen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This changed everything. Thorn hadn't just left her a clue. He had left her a weapon. He had anticipated his own disappearance, and had ingeniously used the very object of his discovery to hide a message from his captors. Altai Corp, in their haste to seize the artifacts and bury the truth, had unwittingly allowed the most damning piece of evidence to slip through their fingers. The cipher was a complex mix of Cyrillic characters and Arabic numerals, a code that seemed designed to be read by a machine, not a human. But Lena's specialty was not just ancient languages. It was the very structure of communication, the patterns and rhythms that underpinned all forms of symbolic expression. She saw not a random string of characters, but a system, a set of rules waiting to be deciphered. The missing person case had just become a high-stakes conspiracy, and she was standing at its epicenter. The gold plaque was no longer just a priceless piece of history. It was a map, a guide that would lead her into the heart of the darkness that had swallowed her mentor. Her quest was no longer just about finding Aris Thorn. It was about uncovering the truth he had died to protect. The laser-etched characters on the gold plaque were a formidable challenge, a modern cryptogram woven into the fabric of ancient art. Lena worked relentlessly, her mind a whirlwind of linguistic theories and decryption algorithms. After 3 days of intense analysis, a pattern began to emerge from the chaos of letters and numbers. It was not a language, but a key, a set of instructions designed to unlock a specific digital vault. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when she cross-referenced the cipher with the title of the Rilke book left in Thorn's office, Sonnets to Orpheus. The cipher was the username. The book's title was the password. With a deep breath, she entered the credentials into a secure web portal she had located through the cipher's encoded routing information. The screen flickered, and a single ominous phrase appeared in stark white letters against a black background. Project Chimera. Below it was the logo of Altai Corp, a stylized mountain peak, a symbol of corporate power and influence. The cipher had led her directly to the DIG's funding initiative, a secret, internal project masked by a veneer of philanthropic cultural preservation. Project Chimera was Altai Corp's clandestine operation, a multi-million-dollar endeavor to manage and control the archaeological dig in the Altai Mountains. Publicly, the company championed its commitment to preserving the region's rich history. Their press releases were filled with glowing statements about protecting cultural heritage and fostering scientific discovery. They had been hailed as a model of corporate responsibility, a shining example of industry and academia working in perfect harmony. But the documents within Project Chimera's files painted a far more sinister picture. Lena navigated through layers of encrypted folders, her skills in pattern recognition allowing her to bypass security protocols that would have thwarted a less specialized intruder. She found internal memos, financial records, and progress reports that revealed Altai Corp's true interest in the region. The archaeological site was located on the border of a vast, resource-rich territory, a landmass that was the subject of a bitter and long-standing dispute between two neighboring countries. Altai Corp was aggressively expanding its mining operations in the area, and securing the land rights to this disputed territory was central to their long-term corporate strategy. The company's sponsorship of Thorn's expedition was not an act of charity. It was a calculated investment. They were not searching for history. They were searching for a specific version of it, one that would bolster their claim to the land and undermine the competing claims of the indigenous groups who had lived there for centuries. Thorn's dig was meant to be a tool, a means of generating a historical narrative that served their corporate interests. But Thorn had found something they hadn't anticipated, something that threatened to unravel their entire carefully constructed facade. Deeper within the encrypted files, Lena uncovered a series of increasingly frantic emails exchanged between Thorn and Altai Corp's top executives. The tone of the correspondence shifted dramatically over the course of several weeks, from collegial and professional to hostile and accusatory. Thorn, initially grateful for their funding, had become suspicious, then openly confrontational. He accused them of suppressing his initial findings, of selectively editing his field reports, and of placing a security consultant on his team who seemed more interested in monitoring his communications than in protecting the site. The final email from Thorn was a bombshell. He stated, in no uncertain terms, that his latest discovery had disastrous geopolitical implications for Altai Corp's land claims. He wrote of irrefutable scientific evidence that would not only rewrite the history of the Scythian people, but would also validate the ancestral land rights of the very indigenous communities. He threatened to go public, to leak his findings to the international press and expose their entire operation. The last email in the chain was not from Thorn, but from an Altai Corp executive to the head of their security division. It was a single, chilling sentence. Dr. Thorn has become a liability. Contain the situation. Immediately, the email was dated the night before Thorn's official disappearance. Lena felt a wave of nausea wash over her. This was it, the digital smoking gun. The proof that Thorn's vanishing was not an accident, but a deliberate act of corporate malfeasance. She downloaded everything, every memo, every email, every financial record, encrypting the data and storing it on a secure, air-gapped hard drive. She was no longer just a historical linguist. She was a witness, the sole possessor of a truth that could bring a multi-billion-dollar corporation to its knees. But with that knowledge came a terrible, crushing weight. Altai Corp had silenced Thorn to protect their interests. Now that she held the same information, she had made herself their next target. The sterile silence of her apartment suddenly felt menacing, the shadows in the corners of the room seeming to lengthen and coalesce. A car idling on the street below sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. Was it just a car? Or was it them? Were they already watching her? She had followed the cipher into the belly of the beast, and now she could feel its cold, calculating gaze upon her. Her world had shrunk to the size of her small apartment, the digital trail she had so skillfully followed now leading directly to her door. She had to move, to disappear before they could contain her too. The game had changed, the stakes raised to a terrifying new level. The sponsor's shadow was no longer just a metaphor. It was a very real and present danger, and it was closing in fast. The data Lena had extracted from Project Chimera's servers was a labyrinth of scientific jargon and heavily redacted reports. It was clear that Altai Corp had attempted to bury Thorn's most explosive findings under layers of corporate obfuscation. But Thorn, in his characteristic foresight, had embedded his unedited research notes within the metadata of seemingly innocuous files. A digital breadcrumb trail left for someone with the patience and expertise to find it. Lena spent another 48 hours painstakingly reconstructing his work, her apartment now a fortress of drawn blinds and disconnected devices. As she pieced together the fragmented data, a revolutionary, paradigm-shifting discovery came into focus. It was the second major twist in the unfolding conspiracy, a revelation so profound it threatened to rewrite not just the history of a single region, but the very foundations of national identity. The centerpiece of Thorn's secret research was a comprehensive DNA analysis of the warrior found in the tomb. The results were unequivocal and stunning. The warrior, presumed to be a high-ranking Scythian chieftain, bore no genetic markers consistent with the known Scythian peoples of the Iron Age. The elaborate armor, the intricate goldwork, the classic Scythian weaponry, it was all a form of cultural appropriation, a deliberate adoption of Scythian customs by an entirely different people. Thorne's analysis revealed that the warrior's DNA was a direct match, an unbroken lineage, to a modern-day indigenous group that was currently locked in a bitter legal battle with Altai Corp over ancestral land rights. This small, marginalized community, whose oral histories and territorial claims had been systematically dismissed by the courts as folklore and fantasy, were the direct descendants of the man in the tomb. Thorne hadn't just discovered a Scythian warrior. He had unearthed the first ancestor of a living people, a man buried with the symbols of a neighboring power, but belonging wholly to the land Altai Corp was now trying to seize. The tomb was not just an archaeological site. It was a deed of title, written in the language of genetics and buried for 2,000 years. Lena's hands shook as she read through Thorne's conclusions. He had understood the implications immediately. His findings transformed the indigenous group's legal case from a contentious and difficult-to-prove claim based on oral tradition into a scientifically verifiable fact. The tomb, located squarely in the center of the disputed territory, was the ultimate proof of their continuous, unbroken inhabitation of the land. It was the single most powerful piece of evidence in a modern legal battle worth billions of dollars, a historical truth that could bankrupt Altai Corp and redraw the map of the entire region. The corporation's motives were now terrifyingly clear. They had sponsored the dig in the hopes of finding something, anything, that would invalidate the indigenous group's claims. They had hoped for a classic Scythian burial, which would have supported the narrative that the land had been inhabited by a succession of migratory peoples, with no single group holding a definitive ancestral claim. Instead, Thorne had handed them a grenade, a discovery so potent it could obliterate their entire corporate enterprise. His containment was not just about silencing a troublesome academic, it was about burying a truth that could shift the balance of power and wealth for an entire nation. Lena uncovered more of Thorne's hidden notes, which detailed his growing horror as he realized what he had found. He had documented his attempts to reason with the Altai Corp executives, to make them understand the historical and ethical significance of his discovery. He had argued for a collaborative approach, one that would honor the indigenous community and their connection to the land. But his pleas had fallen on deaf ears. The executives saw his discovery not as a bridge to the past, but as an obstacle to their future, a multi-billion-dollar problem that needed to be eliminated. The weight of this knowledge was immense. Lena was no longer just avenging her mentor, she was now the custodian of a truth that could restore justice to a people who had been wronged for generations. The gold plaque, still sitting on her desk, seemed to hum with a new energy, its ancient artistry now a testament to a history that had been deliberately unwritten. The Scythian-style griffins and stags were not just decoration, they were a symbol of a people who had lived and died on this land, their legacy now resting in her hands. She knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Alticorp's digital security teams would eventually trace the breach back to her. They would come for the data, and they would come for her. She had to get this information to someone who could use it, someone who could bring it into the light of day. The courts, the media, an international tribunal. She didn't know the right path yet, but she knew she couldn't walk it alone. Thorne, in his final desperate days, must have realized this as well. He must have been looking for an ally, someone on the ground who could help him disseminate the truth. As she scanned through his last encrypted communications, a name appeared, a single point of contact in the Altai region that was not affiliated with the university or the corporation. It was a local journalist, an activist known for his fearless reporting on corporate corruption and indigenous rights. It was a long shot, a faint hope in the encroaching darkness, but it was the only lead she had. She had to find this man, this local contact, who might have been Thorne's last hope, and now had become hers. The unwritten history of a people was encoded on her hard drive, and the shadow of a ruthless corporation was falling ever faster across her path. The name from Thorne's encrypted notes, Kalen, belonged to a freelance journalist whose online presence was a carefully curated trail of dead ends and pseudonyms. He was a digital ghost, a phantom who reported on the shadowy dealings of powerful corporations from the safety of anonymity. Finding him felt like chasing a whisper in the wind. But Thorne had left one more clue, a seemingly random string of numbers in the margins of his notes that Lena, after cross-referencing it with a regional map, identified as a coordinate for a small remote village in the Altai foothills. Leaving her digital life behind, Lena traveled incognito, a journey of 1,000 miles by train and bus. Her paranoia, a constant, unwelcome companion. Every stranger's gaze felt like a threat. Every official uniform a potential agent of Altai Corp. She arrived in the village, a place where time seemed to have slowed to a crawl, and found her way to a small, dusty tea house, the location indicated by Thorne's coordinates. It was there, after 3 days of patient waiting and quiet observation, that a man with cautious eyes and a weary face finally approached her table. It was Kalen. He had been watching her since her arrival, his journalistic instincts honed by years of living in the shadow of corporate power. He had recognized her from the press photos taken during the announcement of Thorne's discovery. He confirmed her identity with a coded phrase from one of Thorne's emails, a final handshake from beyond the grave. In the relative privacy of a secluded corner, with the aroma of strong tea and wood smoke hanging in the air, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Kalen confirmed Thorne's worst fears. He had been Thorne's secret confidant for months, a local ally who provided him with information about Altai Corp's activities in the region. Thorne had contacted him in secret, his suspicions growing about the true nature of his sponsors. Kalen painted a chilling picture of Altai Corp's operations, a campaign of intimidation, bribery, and legal manipulation designed to systematically disenfranchise the local indigenous communities. Thorne, Kalen explained, had come to realize that his dig was not a scientific endeavor, but a carefully orchestrated charade. Altai Corp had sponsored the excavation with one goal in mind, to ensure that any discoveries that could challenge their extensive land claims were buried, both literally and figuratively. They had handpicked the site, believing it to be a standard Scythian settlement that would support their desired historical narrative. They had funded Thorne, a world-renowned archaeologist, to give their findings an unimpeachable veneer of academic legitimacy. The plan had backfired spectacularly. Thorne, a man of unshakable integrity, had found the one thing they couldn't afford to have found. Kalen revealed that Thorne had been preparing to leak his entire data cache, a bombshell of scientific proof that would have exposed Altai Corp's fraud and secured the land rights for the indigenous community. He had compiled everything, the DNA analysis, the unedited field notes, the internal corporate emails, into a single encrypted file. The night he was abducted was the night he had arranged to meet Kalen to hand over the data. The meeting never happened. Kalen had waited for hours at their pre-arranged rendezvous point, a remote spot in the mountains, only to hear the news the next morning that Thorne had vanished, another victim of the treacherous terrain. Kalen had known instantly that it was a lie, but with no proof and the full weight of Altai Corp's influence against him, he had been forced into hiding, a journalist with the story of a lifetime and no way to tell it. Lena's arrival was a lifeline, a confirmation that Thorne's work had not died with him. She showed him the data she had recovered, the DNA analysis, the Project Chimera files. Kalen, in turn, provided the context, the on-the-ground knowledge of Altai Corp's ruthless tactics. He told her of other activists, academics, and community leaders who had opposed the corporation and had subsequently suffered accidents, public shamings, or financial ruin. Altai Corp did not leave loose ends. Together they now possessed the whole truth, the scientific proof, and the journalistic evidence to back it up. But they were two people against a corporate giant. A Goliath with deep pockets and a long, shadowy reach. They were in possession of a truth that could change the course of history, but they were also in immense danger. Kalen's hideout, a small, isolated cabin deep in the forest, offered temporary safety, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before Altai Corp's trackers found them. Lena felt a surge of renewed purpose, a fierce determination to see Thorne's mission through to the end. She was no longer just an academic fighting for her mentor's reputation. She was a key player in a battle for justice, a fight for the soul of a people and their ancestral land. With Kalen as her ally, she was no longer alone. They had the evidence, they had the motive, and now they had a plan. They needed to get the data to an institution with the power and credibility to challenge Altai Corp on a global stage. Lena knew exactly where to go. She would return to her own institute, a respected academic body with a reputation for integrity. She would present her findings to the director, a man she had known and trusted for years. With the Institute's backing, they could go public, they could force an international investigation, and they could finally bring Thorne's killers to justice. It was a risky move, returning to the very place where her journey began, but it was their best and only shot. She had to believe that the academic world, the world she had dedicated her life to, would stand for the truth. The journey back to the city was a tense, nerve-wracking affair. Lena and Kalen traveled separately, using a series of misdirections and roundabout routes to throw off any potential tails. Lena, now carrying the encrypted hard drive that held the key to Altacorp's downfall, felt the weight of its significance with every step. She had placed her faith in the integrity of her own institution, the one place she believed to be a sanctuary of truth and academic freedom. It was a faith that was about to be shattered. She secured a meeting with Director Evans, the head of the institute, and a man who had been a mentor and friend to her for years. She chose her words carefully, laying out the evidence in a calm, logical sequence. Thorne's disappearance, the sanitized office, the coded plaque, the Project Chimera files, the DNA analysis. She presented it not as a wild conspiracy theory, but as a chain of verifiable facts demanding investigation. She believed that the sheer weight of the evidence would compel him to act, to mobilize the Institute's considerable resources to protect her and expose the truth. Evans listened intently, his expression a carefully constructed mask of concern and scholarly interest. He asked probing questions, examining the fragments of data she showed him with a practiced eye. He commended her for her bravery, her resourcefulness, her loyalty to Thorne. He assured her that the Institute would take her findings very seriously, that they would launch an immediate internal inquiry. He promised her the full protection of the institution, a safe haven from the corporate storm she had uncovered. For a fleeting moment, Lena felt a wave of relief, a sense of vindication. She had done it. She had brought the truth home. Then came the third major twist, a betrayal so stunning and absolute it felt like a physical blow. After assuring her of his support, Evans made a phone call. He spoke in low, coded language, his back turned to her. When he hung up, the mask of concern was gone, replaced by a cold, appraising stare. "You've been very busy, Dr. Petrova," he said, his voice stripped of all its former warmth. "But your investigation ends now." He calmly walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, and took the encrypted hard drive from her hands. Before she could react, he slid it into a powerful desktop degausser, a device used for the instantaneous and permanent erasure of magnetic media. With a low hum, Thorne's life's work, the unwritten history of a people, the entire cache of evidence against Altacorp, was wiped from existence in less than a second. Lena stared at him, speechless, her mind struggling to process the enormity of his betrayal. Evans sighed, a sound of weary resignation. He then confessed, his voice flat and emotionless, that he was a paid consultant for Altacorp. He had been on their payroll for over a decade. The Institute, he explained, was in dire financial straits, and Altacorp's charitable donations secretly provided a significant portion of its annual funding. The mining treaties that Thorne's discovery threatened were not just a corporate concern, they were the lifeblood of the very institution Lena had sought for protection. Thorne, he admitted, had been neutralized to protect those treaties, to safeguard the delicate and dirty alliance between the corporation and the Institute. His abduction had been sanctioned at the highest levels, a necessary sacrifice to maintain the status quo. Evans had been the one who had recommended the professional sanitization of Thorne's office, the one who had fed the official narrative of an accidental death to the authorities. He had been playing her from the very beginning. He then delivered his final, chilling warning. She was to abandon her investigation immediately. If she spoke to anyone, if she made any attempt to reconstruct the data or continue her quest, she would be systematically discredited. He would personally see to it that her career was destroyed, her reputation shredded, her name dragged through the mud until she was nothing more than a cautionary tale. A brilliant but unstable academic who had succumbed to paranoid delusions after the tragic death of her mentor. She would be professionally and psychologically broken, a ghost in her own life. Lena felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The sanctuary she had run to was a trap. The man she had trusted was her enemy. She was utterly terrifyingly alone, stripped of her evidence, her credibility, and her last hope. She had walked into the lion's den, and the lion was wearing the face of a friend. The betrayal was absolute, a clean, sharp cut that severed her from everything she had ever known. As she backed away from him, her mind numb with shock and horror, she saw the gold plaque sitting on a display shelf behind his desk. It had been transferred from Thorne's office, just as the security guards had said. Evans followed her gaze. "A beautiful piece, isn't it?" he said, a cruel hint of a smile playing on his lips. A reminder that some histories are better left buried. In that moment, Lena understood. Thorne must have suspected Evans. He must have known about the Institute's dirty secret. The plaque, left so prominently in his office, was not just a message for her. It was a test, a final, desperate gambit. And now, thanks to Evans's own arrogance, it was the only piece of evidence she had left. She had to get out, to escape the web of deceit that had been woven around her. Her life was no longer her own. She was a liability, a loose end, and she knew with a chilling certainty that Alticorp and its academic allies would not hesitate to tie it. The hunt was on, and she was the prey. The world outside the Institute's hallowed halls was no longer a place of anonymity, but a hunting ground. Lena was now a liability, a known quantity to an enemy with seemingly limitless resources. The professional destruction Director Evans had promised began with terrifying speed. Within hours, a university-wide email announced she was under investigation for academic misconduct, citing the theft of the gold plaque and the fabrication of research data. Her university accounts were frozen, her access to campus facilities revoked. She was an outcast, a pariah, her name and reputation tarnished with a few calculated keystrokes. She went on the run, moving from one cheap cash-only motel to another, the city's indifferent crowds her only camouflage. She was haunted by the constant fear of being watched, the chilling sense that every camera, every face in the crowd, could be an agent of Alticorp. Kalen, now her only lifeline, communicated through encrypted channels, his messages a grim litany of their escalating danger. He had discovered the identity of the man Evans and Alticorp used to contain their problems, a ruthless security contractor named Roman, a former Special Forces operative with a long and bloody history in corporate espionage. Roman was not just a thug, he was a ghost, an artist of disappearance. Kalen's research revealed a trail of accidents and public shamings that followed in Roman's wake. A respected environmental scientist who had challenged Alticorp's mining practices in South America died in a tragic car crash. A crusading journalist investigating their labor violations in Africa was publicly discredited by a manufactured scandal, his career left in ruins. A community activist organizing protests against their land seizures in Southeast Asia simply vanished, his case, like Thorne's, eventually closed due to a lack of evidence. Roman was the enforcer, the shadowy figure who cleaned up Alticorp's messes, ensuring that their path to profit remained clear of inconvenient people. Lena realized with a sickening certainty that she was not just solving a disappearance. She had become the next target in this long-running campaign of silence and terror. The hunt was real, a palpable threat that dogged her every move. One evening, as she was leaving a small internet cafe, a black sedan with tinted windows screeched to a halt beside her. The door flew open, and a large, imposing figure lunged for her. Instinct and adrenaline took over. She threw her hot coffee in his face and sprinted into the labyrinthine alleys of the city, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't look back, but she could feel his presence behind her, a relentless predator closing in on his prey. She escaped, but the encounter left her shaken to the core. This was no longer a battle of wits and data. It was a fight for survival. She was an academic, a linguist, a woman whose life had been spent in the quiet, contemplative world of books and symbols. Now, she was forced to navigate a world of violence and fear, a world where the skills that had defined her were useless. She had to learn to think like Roman, to anticipate his moves, to become as much of a ghost as he was. Kalen's messages became her only guide. He fed her information on Roman's methods, his known associates, his patterns of operation. He urged her to abandon all her old habits, to become unpredictable, to sever all ties with her former life. She cut and dyed her hair in a cheap motel bathroom, bought clothes from a second-hand store that were nothing like her own style, and adopted a new, more cautious way of moving through the world. She was transforming, shedding the skin of Dr. Lena Petrova and becoming someone else, someone harder, more vigilant, more attuned to the rhythms of the hunt. The psychological toll was immense. Paranoia became her constant companion. The sleep she managed to get was plagued by nightmares of Roman's faceless pursuit. She was isolated, cut off from everything and everyone she had ever known. The only thing that kept her going was the memory of Thorn and the knowledge of the truth he had died to protect. She still had the gold plaque, her only tangible link to the past and her only hope for the future. She had managed to retrieve it from Evans's office during the chaos of her initial escape, a desperate, last-minute gamble that had paid off. It was her burden and her weapon, the one piece of the puzzle Altai Corp did not know she possessed. She knew she couldn't outrun Roman forever. He was too good, too relentless, his resources too vast. Her only hope was to go on the offensive, to find a way to use the truth as a shield. She had to get the story out, but she couldn't go to the authorities or the media, all of whom could be influenced or controlled by Altai Corp's vast network. She needed allies who were beyond the corporation's reach, allies who had as much at stake in this fight as she did. Kaelin's research had given her a new idea, a desperate, high-risk plan. The key to her survival, she realized, might lie not in running from the past, but in embracing the very history Thorn had uncovered. She had to find the descendants, the people whose stolen legacy was the cause of this entire conspiracy. They were the only ones who might be able to help her. Guided by Kaelin's secure communications and the geographical data from Thorn's original notes, Lena made her way back to the Altai region. It was a perilous journey, a high-stakes gamble to trade the anonymity of the city for the potential sanctuary of the very community at the heart of the conspiracy. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a pilgrim, carrying the last remnant of a sacred history back to its rightful owners. Kaelin had arranged a clandestine meeting, a delicate dance of trust in a world where betrayal had become the norm. In a secluded mountain valley, far from the prying eyes of Alticorp's security patrols, she was met by the elders of the indigenous community. They were a people whose faces were etched with the wisdom of generations, their eyes holding a deep, sorrowful knowledge of the land and the injustices it had borne. They greeted her not with suspicion, but with a quiet, solemn recognition. Kaelin, who had earned their trust over years of honest reporting, stood with them, a bridge between Lena's world of scientific data and their world of ancestral truth. Lena presented them with the gold plaque, the last surviving piece of Thorn's discovery. As she laid the heavy, gleaming artifact before them, a palpable wave of emotion rippled through the small gathering. They recognized the animal-style art, not as Scythian, but as the work of their own ancestors, a style that had been passed down through generations in their carvings and weavings. They had no need for DNA analysis to tell them who the man in the tomb was. They already knew. They called the tomb the cradle of the first ancestor, a sacred site known to them for generations through a rich and detailed oral history. This history, which they had presented in court countless times, had always been dismissed by the authorities, and Altai Corp's high-priced lawyers as mere folklore, as the unsubstantiated myths of a primitive people. Now, in Lena's hands, was the scientific validation of everything they had ever claimed. Thorn's discovery was not a discovery to them, but a confirmation, a vindication of a truth they had carried in their hearts for centuries. The elders then revealed that they possessed their own proof, a treasure trove of ancestral knowledge that had been carefully guarded and passed down from one generation to the next. They showed Lena ancient maps, drawn on tanned hides and marked with symbols that corresponded to the geographical features of the disputed territory. They brought out artifacts, tools, and ceremonial objects that had been unearthed from other, smaller burial sites over the years, all bearing the same distinctive artistic style as the gold plaque. They possessed a living history, a cultural archive that corroborated Thorn's scientific data with breathtaking precision. They had been waiting, they explained, for a sign, for a moment when their knowledge could be brought into the light without being stolen or discredited. Thorn, they believed, had been that sign, a man of science who had stumbled upon their truth and had the integrity to recognize it for what it was. His disappearance was a tragedy they had felt deeply, a silencing of a voice that had been ready to speak for them. Lena's arrival, bearing the plaque and the story of Thorn's sacrifice, was the continuation of that promise. Working with the elders and Kalen, Lena began to see the bigger picture. The fight against Altai Corp was not just a legal battle or a corporate conspiracy. It was the latest chapter in a long history of cultural erasure and colonial exploitation. The corporation's greed was just a modern manifestation of an ancient injustice. The descendants of the first ancestor were not just victims. They were warriors fighting to protect a legacy that was inextricably linked to the land itself. The elders' knowledge, combined with the scientific data Lena had managed to retain in her memory, formed a powerful new weapon. They could now construct a narrative that was unassailable, one that blended rigorous scientific proof with the undeniable power of cultural heritage. They had the science, they had the history, and they had the living proof in the faces of the people themselves. But they were still missing the final piece of the puzzle, the key that would unlock the full potential of their combined knowledge. Lena knew that key was still hidden within the gold plaque. Thorn was too meticulous, too cunning, to have left her with just a cipher leading to a data cache that could be erased. The plaque itself, she realized, must hold more than just a username and password. It had to be the final fail-safe, the ultimate insurance policy. As the elders shared their stories, their language, and their symbols with her, Lena began to look at the plaque with new eyes, seeing not just a Scythian-style artifact, but a map, a story, a message encoded in a language that was older and deeper than any she had ever studied. The plaque's true purpose was yet to be revealed, and she knew that uncovering it was the final critical step in honoring her mentor's sacrifice and restoring the unwritten history of his discovery. In the heart of the indigenous community's ancestral lands, surrounded by the quiet wisdom of the elders and the relentless dedication of Kalen, Lena devoted herself to unlocking the plaque's final secret. She was no longer just a linguist. She was an apprentice, learning the symbolic language of the first ancestors' people. The intricate swirls of the animal-style art, which she had once analyzed with the cold precision of a spectrograph, now began to speak to her in a new, more profound way. The elders showed her how the position of a griffin's wing, the curve of a stag's antler, the number of feathers in a bird's crest, all had specific meanings within their cultural cosmology. This was the fourth major twist, the moment of profound revelation. The plaque was not just a carrier of a modern cipher. Its entire ancient design was a cipher itself, a complex, multi-layered message. Thorn, a master of symbols, must have recognized this. He had not simply etched a modern code onto a random artifact. He had chosen the one object whose own symbolic language could hide his message in plain sight. He had used the ancient art as a framework, a scaffold upon which to build his ultimate fail-safe. Working tirelessly with Kalen, Lena began to cross-reference the microscopic laser etchings with the larger ancient symbols. It was a painstaking process, a fusion of modern cryptography and ancient iconography. The laser-etched characters, she discovered, were not a single linear message, but a series of keys that corresponded to specific elements of the Scythian-style art. A number here corresponded to a stag's horn there. A Cyrillic letter in one corner unlocked the meaning of a swirling griffin in another. It was a work of pure genius, a message hidden within a message, a lock that required two keys, one modern, one ancient, to be opened. Slowly, painstakingly, the plaque's true purpose was revealed. It was more than just information, it was a treasure map. The deciphered message contained a set of precise GPS coordinates, pointing to a location deep within a remote, uninhabited part of the mountain range. It also contained a complex alphanumeric key, a long string of characters that seemed to be a password or an access code of some kind. Lena realized with a jolt of awe and admiration that Thorn had anticipated everything, the erasure of his digital files, the betrayal of his colleagues, his own capture and probable death. His disappearance was not just a tragedy, it was a calculated move, a strategic sacrifice. He had deliberately allowed himself to be taken to buy time, to create a diversion that would draw Corp's attention away from his true legacy. He had left the plaque for her, and only for her, because he knew she possessed the unique combination of skills required to decode it. She was a specialist in ancient languages and a natural at seeing patterns, the only person in his world who could bridge the gap between the ancient symbols and the modern cipher. His vanishing was the ultimate act of trust, a final, desperate gambit to place his life's work into the hands of someone he knew would see it through to the end. The plaque was his final testament, a message sent from beyond the grave. It was a fail-safe designed to protect the one thing that couldn't be digitally erased or professionally discredited: physical evidence. The coordinates, Lena was certain, led to a hidden cache containing the original, untampered with artifacts from the tomb. It would also, she suspected, contain a signed affidavit from Thorn himself, a detailed account of his findings, and a condemnation of Corp's actions, a document that would be his testimony in the court of world opinion. The weight of this realization was immense. Thorn had not just left her a puzzle to solve. He had entrusted her with his legacy, with the physical proof that could bring an empire of corporate greed crashing down. He had given her the key to unlock the truth. A truth that was more powerful, more tangible, and more dangerous than any digital file. She and Kalen now had a clear objective, a final destination for their perilous journey. The elders, upon hearing of the plaque's true meaning, offered their full support. They provided Lena and Kalen with supplies, with knowledge of the terrain, and with a small group of their most experienced trackers to guide them to the coordinates. The journey would be treacherous, leading them into the very wilderness that Corp had used as the cover story for Thorn's disappearance. But now they were not running from a ghost. They were chasing one, following a map laid out by a brilliant and courageous man. The plaque, once a symbol of a lost history, had become a beacon of hope, a guide to a future where the truth would finally be brought to light. The final act of the drama was about to begin, and the stage was set in the remote, unforgiving beauty of the Altai Mountains. The GPS coordinates on the plaque led Lena, Kalen, and their indigenous guides to a place that defied all expectations. It was not a cave or a hidden mountain pass, but a relic of a bygone era of conflict, a remote, decommissioned Cold War listening post, its rust-streaked satellite dishes pointing like skeletal fingers at the sky. The alphanumeric key from the plaque, when entered into a corroded keypad by the blast-proof door, caused the heavy lock to groan open, revealing a passage into the earth. Thorn, with his love for history's ironies, had chosen an old bastion of secrets to hide a new one. Inside, the air was cold and still, the silence absolute. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a small, dry chamber filled with carefully packed crates. It was Thorn's cache, his final, brilliant gambit. They found the original, untampered with artifacts from the tomb, each one meticulously catalogued and preserved. And there, resting on top of the central crate, was a waterproof case containing a thick manuscript and a series of data drives. It was Thorn's signed affidavit, his complete, unedited research, and a detailed chronicle of Corp's conspiracy. It was the truth, made physical and undeniable. But their triumph was short-lived. As they were securing the cache, the deep silence of the listening post was shattered by the sound of approaching vehicles. A new set of headlights cut through the twilight outside, and the crunch of tires on gravel announced the arrival of their pursuers. Roman and his team of Corp enforcers had found them. They were cornered, trapped deep within the earth with the very evidence that had cost Thorn his life. The mercenaries swarmed the entrance, their black tactical gear, a stark contrast to the rugged landscape. Roman's voice, amplified by a bullhorn, echoed down the tunnel, ordering them to surrender the artifacts and come out. He made it clear that there would be no negotiations, no escape. His orders, he snarled, were to secure the assets and leave no witnesses. Just as despair began to set in, a single, unexpected vehicle peeled away from the Corp convoy and sped towards a different hidden service entrance to the bunker, one their guides had pointed out. The vehicle skidded to a halt, and out stepped the last person Lena ever expected to see, Director Evans. He was alone, his face pale and drawn, his expensive suit now disheveled and out of place. He raised his hands, not in aggression, but in a gesture of frantic appeal. This was the final shocking twist. Evans, seeing them cornered, didn't join the assault. Instead, he offered them a way out. "They're here to clean house," he shouted, his voice strained with panic. "And I'm the last loose end on their list." He revealed that Alta Corp, in its ruthless efficiency, had decided to sever all ties to the conspiracy. With Thorne's cash located, Evans, the man who knew about the Institute's complicity, had outlived his usefulness. Roman's orders were not just to eliminate Lena and Kalen, but to eliminate him as well. The betrayal had come full circle. The man who had betrayed his friend and protégé was now a liability, marked for death by the same corporate machine he had so faithfully served. As the corporate mercenaries began to rappel down the main ventilation shaft, their voices and the clatter of their gear growing closer, Lena was faced with an impossible choice. Could she trust the man who had sent her mentor to his death, the architect of her professional ruin? His offer of escape could be another trap, a final, desperate ploy to save himself by leading them into an ambush. Or was his terror genuine, the desperate self-preservation of a man who knew he was about to be erased? Attempting to fight their way out seemed impossible, a suicidal stand against a superior force. The price of history was laid bare in that cold underground chamber. To leak the truth that could rewrite a nation's history and restore a people's birthright, Lena had to decide in a split second whether to place her trust in the enemy who had become an unwilling ally. The fate of Thorne's legacy, Kalen's mission, and the future of the first ancestors' descendants rested on her choice. With the sound of Roman's enforcers echoing in the tunnel, a harbinger of imminent violence, she had to weigh the poison of a known betrayal against the hope of a shared escape, and make a decision that would either save them all or seal their doom.